Well, good morning. Good morning. And welcome to the first live Q&A for our Sting in the Tail series. I'm really quite excited about doing these, having done, a live Q&A after a talk for quite a few couple of years now at Morelands. And the main reason why we're doing this, as I said in the leading a bit earlier this morning, is that we want to listen to Jesus' words and put them into practice. So hopefully this is one way in which you guys can send any questions that you might have, and we're still going to take questions during the live Q&A. And we've already got a couple in the waiting room as well. But before we do, I just want to say we're trying to keep this quite brief. So we're aiming for around 15 minutes. Hopefully that'll give you time to go and have lunch with your families a little bit later on. But before we start, thanks so much, Gareth. Thank you for your talk.
Thanks, Dan.
I think it's been really exciting. I'm quite excited about the whole of the series because they are parables that we think that we know quite well, parables that are often quite familiar to us, as you said, especially with the Good Samaritan, something that we've heard in school or is kind of diffused into our kind of common language, being a Good Samaritan. I want to say first, I was incredibly struck by when you were talking about how this expert of the law bends in and bends out kind of rules to justify himself, and just think about how often, especially in lockdown, that I can either bend the rules in to make myself feel better about how I'm complying, but also bend them out in terms of thinking how people aren't doing how I would kind of adhere to certain restrictions, and then the reason for that is to make myself look better. Both of which are kind of being massively humbled in the parable that we've got before us.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that was one of the biggest shocks for me, was kind of taking the parable into its context and then seeing how, it feels like it's giving us in some ways laws to keep, but really it's doing the exact opposite, and how we see that everywhere, don't we? So that was a big shock to me as I was working on the passage. I really enjoyed finding that.
Yeah, definitely. Hi Esme, hi Andrew Blaine, see you both there. Great. We've got a question here, which I think is going to be it's one that I actually had as well. So I'm not being biased, but it's hopefully a helpful one, where someone's speaking about asking the question. Jesus tells this expert to first to do this and live, and then to go and do likewise. And just thinking about, well, why would he say such a thing if that's impossible? As you said in your talk, both under both questions, actually, both of these are things that, yes, if you do them, you will live. You can inherit eternal life. But at the same time, it's more always condemned because we know that we can't live up to those good and right standards to love the Lord of God with our heart, soul, mind, strength, and to love our neighbours as ourselves. So Gareth, I'm guessing you've done quite a lot of work over the last couple of weeks. Why do you think Jesus uses this tactic in terms of trying to reveal the expert of the law's heart and his kind of need for something other than himself?
Yeah, it's a great question. Thanks, Dan, and thanks whoever sent that in. I think, as I was working through the passage, really those last 4 words have been the hardest ones for me to think about, because if Jesus just said, look at the Good Samaritan and understand this or something, then you'd be like, okay, so now I need to just interpret it. But he does say, go and do likewise. I think as you helpfully just reminded us, he does that twice, in verse 28 and in verse 37. He's got those twice. He tells the expert to do something. And I think that's because he's picking up on what the expert's asked in the beginning. So he's really answering the expert where the expert is. The expert says, what must I do to inherit eternal life? And Jesus tells him the 2 things he needs to do, which are the same thing, one kind of smaller and one then bigger. And I think it really is that he's saying to do something he can't do, because the expert needs to understand that. We all need to understand. That's the big point of this passage, is that we can't do it. So it feels crazy that he's saying go and do it, but in the very act of kind of commanding us to do something we can't do, we're then forced to realize that we are kind of helpless and hopeless without someone kind of enabling us to do it, or making a way that gives us life without doing it, and kind of frees us from that. Someone who can keep the law better than we can, which in the passage is shown by the Samaritans. He keeps the law and does the thing. And then I think the whole story of Luke's gospel, we see that as being Jesus, the one who can keep the law better than we can. And as we realize that we can't keep it, we're forced to run to one who's kept it and can give us that right standing without doing it. But it's you've got to have that first step. I think the expert law hasn't got that at all. He needs to have that first step, and he needs to kind of keep trying to do it and failing. And the more he obviously realizes he fails because he tries to narrow it. So he's got an idea of that, but he needs to kind of really get that clear before he's going to understand that he's helpless and he needs something more.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thanks, Gareth. I think it's also partly to do with the whole nature of this series we're going to look at with parables and how they kind of get under our skin, so that with this, you said it's a confrontation question. And so if Jesus just kind of laid it into this expert of the law, he's straight away be on the defensive and attack back. But yet in the way in which he tells a parable and tells him to do what he knows he should already be doing, he's actually revealing the man's heart to himself, showing that he doesn't meet up to the standards he's already said that he needs to. And so therefore giving him, he actually gets to the end, he says, actually, it's the person who had mercy on him. He learns the lesson by seeing his kind of the way in which he can't narrow down and refine the commands. He has to open them up to as they're originally been given to show that he fails, and to give him that need for a kind of Samaritan-like figure for himself. And
that's as we thought about in the introduction to the series that Danny gave us, that's really what the parable's going to do. They're going to kind of filter us, and either we're going to hear it and we're going to see something more about Jesus, or as we're kind of expressing in the talk, we're going to, as we commonly do, see this just as a moral tale. We're going to see it as something to live up to, where it's actually the exact opposite. And seeing those two things, that's the job of the parable, really, is to kind of, it's going to push us in one direction or the other. And if we get it, then it's really good news. As we go through, we're just going to see Jesus much more clearly and in a much bigger way throughout all of these talks.
Great, thanks, Gareth. Just conscious of the time, just want to press on, so we're not just going to chat through all the whole one question, but it's also important. Hi, Dan. I think that's Dan. Oh, and hi, Joe. Hi, thanks so much for your feedback. So Esme's got a question. I think that's helpful, kind of following on from what we were saying about this. Jesus telling this guy to go and do likewise, to show him that he is someone who is half dead and in need of a Samaritan. And Esme has put in the live chat the question about basically why does Jesus choose a Samaritan to be his kind of the epitome of someone who is showing mercy to neighbours? Why not just choose any old person? Is it partly because it's unexpected, it's a twist in the tale, something that would drastically shock people? I guess you mentioned a little bit about who the Samaritans are, didn't you, in terms of in that second point, who is my neighbour, and how they are people who are often portrayed or viewed by the Jewish people as those who are unclean and impure, as those who have failed to keep God's commands by marrying people who aren't Jewish, something that God tells us not to do in Deuteronomy chapter 7. But why in particular does Jesus choose that character, do you think, Gareth, in terms of in the tale to show why we need, or kind of opening up that command of who is our neighbour?
Yeah, I think what you just said is very helpful. It's about that kind of law-keeping aspect. The Samaritan, someone who, to every law-abiding Jew, is seen as the complete opposite of that. And Jesus is going to expose our views of law-keeping, our views of what makes you right with God. And as he exposes all those things, he's really using it is the most unexpected, but it's not just that they're unexpected, it's that they're kind of the wrong person to show what the law is like and to really understand the law. And in doing so, we have to look at what is it really that the law is about, and what is it really that this person has and does. And as we saw those two words, compassion and mercy, which brought us into the bigger picture of Luke's story. And because he's a Samaritan, we're not just kind of think, if it had been a priest or even just a normal Israelite, we'd think, well, that's great, because actually throughout the history of Israel, sometimes the priests weren't well liked or weren't doing their job very well. And sometimes it took an ordinary person to rediscover the law and things, to kind of keep things back on track. And God used lots of different people in that kind of a way. So it might not be as surprising, but this is the complete opposite, the complete kind of antagonist to the law. And in doing so, that really focuses on what our state is and who can really keep the law. It's not necessarily being right with being in the right kind of birth and all the other things that the Jews would have thought, but it's the underlying heart attitude of compassion and mercy, which we can see we don't have, and we need to rest on one who does. And I suppose kind of a second little answer to that is the Samaritan is the most unlikely person, and they are an outcast. They're rejected and they're kind of despised by the Jewish people. And I think if you read on through Luke, you'll see how that is also picked up in the life of Jesus as he goes to the cross, kind of despised and rejected. And I think there's elements of that in there as well, but I wouldn't want to push that too far.
Yeah, no, that is helpful. Even if we not try to push it too far, we do see this how the Samaritan, as you said, is someone who has like compassion, like the character of Jesus, and also someone who shows mercy, like the character of God, and like leads into action, as we see ultimately in Jesus, that he pays that price that we need to bring us life. That's really helpful. We've got a couple of questions that I think are quite similar through the website or through some texting in, who are basically both saying, to what extent should we emulate that of the Good Samaritan? To what extent should we be those who do try to go and do likewise in regards to how we view others? I guess majorly through the parable, he's widening that who's my neighbor question, but I guess also to what extent should we be doing go and do likewise in terms of loving the Lord our God with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength. So wondering, Gareth, have you got any kind of thoughts in terms of, you did mention briefly, I think, in your conclusion about who is the Good Samaritan, as there are lessons to learn, how confessing a love of God should lead to loving others. We've had a little bit of a think about that in our 1 John series, if people were there for that. But yeah, it's not just a moral lesson, but it is also something that we should be emulating if we're also those who want to be like Jesus, I guess, as those who trust in him. So to what extent should we go and do likewise, or is that just the secondary implication of the main point?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. It's the obvious question kind of coming out of it, and I want to be really clear that I wouldn't say that you should try not to be like the Good Samaritan. That would be kind of mad, really. But I think it's a question of priority. So for the expert, his loving others and loving God was motivated entirely by whether that was going to make him right. That was where he was coming from. And as soon as he'd loved enough neighbors to tick the box, once he kind of narrowed it down who my neighbor is, then he would be done. That would be it. No more, 3 o'clock on a Friday, I've loved enough neighbors, I'm off, I'm done. It's great, and that would be the way that he would live his life if you're kind of keeping that strict rule keeping. So I think the answer really is, because we're not looking to love our neighbors to earn this salvation, then we're free to love our neighbors because actually love them. Loving your neighbor to earn something from it is not love. We all know what that feels like when someone is kind of kind to us just so they can get what they want. It's a very unpleasant feeling. And if you're treating the world like that, like Jesus says to love you once I've kind of felt like I've loved you enough, and I'm going to hang you out to dry because I don't need you anymore because I've ticked my box. But if you're someone who is trusting that you can't do enough love to make yourself right, that only Jesus can give you the compassion and mercy you need to kind of redeem you and to make you right, then it's a very different picture of going and doing likewise. So I'm not saying people shouldn't. I think it'd be great if we can be more like the Samaritan, but not for the reasons that the expert asks, but because we already are right, and therefore we can live a life that's very different. And as you say, pointing back to that 1 John series was really that was our first series that was online. So I think all the video talks are online as well for that. That'd be a great series to listen back to, because that's all about how we love each other because we've been loved by Jesus and made right. And we'll probably see more of that as we go through the parables about what it means to live rightly before Jesus, and also to kind of live those two things, because it can feel quite tense at times, those ideas. But I don't think there's any tension in this passage at all. And once once you're someone who, like the half-dead man, is throwing themselves at the mercy of the one who offers it, then you can, I imagine that the half-dead man afterwards probably lived a different life for him because he'd been rescued from this near-death experience. And it's the same for us.
Great, thanks, Gareth. I think that's really helpful, just that idea of freed up to love, and not just how much love is enough, I can tick the box, but actually lavishly pouring out love to others. And because that's a picture of who Jesus is, and therefore how much beautiful Jesus is. He doesn't just love you for a couple of hours and that's enough for today, but rather his love is constant. And we see it ultimately at the cross. Awesome. I think because of time, we're going to try and round up there. Hopefully, I think we've answered most of the questions that have been sent into us. Just a reminder, this is kind of the first of hopefully many live Q&As we're going to have for the Staying in the Tale series. Hopefully it's going to be a real helpful resource to be thinking through what Jesus is saying, therefore putting his words into practice. I just want to briefly highlight two things. One is that if you've got any other questions and you want more of a space to ask those questions, that our live course begins this Wednesday. And if you want to sign up for that, you can do so on our online page under the life groups section. And secondly, the best way really to be thinking through Jesus' words is just to keep on listening to them. And so the best thing to do is to try and tune in next Sunday at 10:30 a.m. Where we're going to look at next parable in our series is going to be from Luke chapter 14, looking at divine hospitality and this kind of awesome feast in the kingdom of God. So that's all from me. Thank you so much, Gareth, for your preparation of the last couple of weeks and for answering those questions.
Thanks, Dan. And thanks to everyone who sent in those questions. It's great to kind of think through some of those things a little bit more, because it's a tricky, well-known passage. There's a lot to think about.
Great, thanks so much. And yeah, I'll hope you have a lovely day and a lovely week. See you later.